The war had ended, but the world hadn't found peace, only a pause. Cities lay in ruins and soldiers returned home carrying silence instead of medals. Yet in that silence, a new kind of fear began to grow, not from the ground, but from above. For the first time in history, humanity looked at the sky and wondered not what was out there, but who might be watching. It began in the ashes of Germany. Deep inside captured factories at Peenemünde, Allied soldiers found strange blueprints, test tunnels, and shattered rocket parts. Among the debris lay the secret weapon that had terrorized London, the V-2 rocket. It was the first machine ever to leave the atmosphere, a 14-meter steel spear that touched space for a few fleeting minutes before plunging back to Earth in fire. To some, it was a weapon of despair. To others, it was a map to the future. The Americans took the engineers, the Soviets took the machines. In a quiet deal now known as Operation Paperclip, the U.S. smuggled more than 100 German scientists across the Atlantic, led by a tall, ambitious man named Wernher von Braun. The Soviets did the same, herding others to the secret city of Kaluga, where they would rebuild what they could remember. Both sides called it research. In truth, it was the opening move in a new kind of war. By 1947, the ink on the peace treaties had barely dried, yet military planners were already redrawing the world. The Iron Curtain split Europe, and paranoia became policy. America had the bomb, the Soviets wanted it, and both understood that whoever controlled the sky would control the earth. For the first time, generals began to talk about the high ground beyond the clouds. Rocket testing moved from the ruins of Germany to the deserts of New Mexico and Kazakhstan. The Americans fired captured V-2s from white sands, watching them streak like comets into the thin blue above. The Soviets answered from Baikonur, an anonymous patch of steppe that would soon become the heart of their space empire. Each launch was officially for science, weather measurements, cosmic rays, atmospheric studies. But everyone knew the truth. These were not experiments. They were rehearsals. Inside the Pentagon, the newly formed U.S. Air Force created a secret committee to study upper atmosphere reconnaissance. The report's language was clinical, but the idea was radical: build a machine that could fly high enough to photograph entire nations, out of reach of enemy defenses. Cameras would replace guns. Film rolls would replace bombs. And from those images, wars could be won before they even began. President Truman approved limited funding. The CIA, still young and eager, saw opportunity. They called it the ultimate eye. But before eyes could reach the heavens, wings had to. In 1953, a slender silver aircraft took shape in a secret hangar in Burbank, California, the U-2 spy plane, designed by Lockheed Skunk Works under the legendary Clarence Kelly Johnson. It could soar above 70,000 feet, far higher than any radar could see. Its pilot would wear a pressurized suit like an astronaut, flying on the edge of space. From that altitude, a single camera could read license plates on Soviet airfields. The Air Force called it a reconnaissance platform. The Soviets called it provocation. For a few years, the balance held. The U-2 photographed missile sites, air bases, even parade formations in Red Square. Every roll of film sent back to Langley revealed the invisible truth of Soviet power, what they had and, more importantly, what they didn't. But the longer those silver planes flew, the more inevitable disaster became. Meanwhile in Moscow, the man they called the chief designer, Sergei Korolev, had been freed from Stalin's gulag and given a mission: build a rocket that could carry a new kind of bomb across continents. His R-7 missile would be capable of reaching anywhere on Earth or beyond it. Korolev saw further than his generals. If it can reach America, he told them, it can also reach orbit. The room fell silent. The idea was madness. Orbit was myth. Yet in the Cold War, myths had budgets. By 1955, the space race had quietly begun, though no one dared call it that yet. American scientists proposed launching a small research satellite, something harmless, something for peace. They called it Project Vanguard. It was meant to showcase America's technological leadership, a polite, civilian demonstration for the upcoming International Geophysical Year. Behind the scenes, however, the military prepared its own version, codenamed Explorer, powered by von Braun's rockets, the same lineage that once terrorized London. The White House worried about optics. Using a Nazi rocket for America's first step into space wouldn't look good. So they waited. The Soviets didn't. In the early hours of October 4, 1957, a new sound echoed across the night sky, a simple, rhythmic beep-beep-beep-beep. It was Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite, a polished aluminum sphere no larger than a beach ball, transmitting its heartbeat from 500 miles above Earth. In Moscow, children cheered. In Washington, men turned pale. The New York Times called it a shock from the sky. For the first time, Americans realized that the Soviet Union could launch something above them, and if they could launch a radio, they could launch a warhead. Senators demanded answers. Newspapers screamed of a missile gap. Children practiced duck-and-cover drills, hiding under desks from imaginary space bombs. Overnight, the heavens had become hostile territory. Eisenhower tried to calm the panic. "There is no reason for hysteria," he said, his voice steady, his eyes tired. But even he knew what it meant. The Soviets had claimed the ultimate high ground. America had lost the first battle of the space age without firing a shot. In Langley, CIA analysts pulled long nights poring over intercepted telemetry from Sputnik. Every frequency, every signal was recorded, charted, obsessed over. They couldn't see it, but they could hear it, that steady beeping taunting the most powerful nation on Earth. A memo circulated that simply read, "We are blind above 70,000 feet." Blindness terrified them more than bombs. By winter, the president authorized a crash effort to create America's first true eye in the sky. The codename, Corona. A project so secret that even its name was changed multiple times to mislead Congress. The idea was almost absurd: launch a camera into orbit, take photographs on film, then drop the canister back through the atmosphere to be caught midair by an airplane. Every engineer who heard it laughed, then signed on. Meanwhile, the Soviets doubled down. They prepared Sputnik 2, carrying a living passenger, Laika, a small stray dog from Moscow streets. She became the first living creature to orbit the Earth, a symbol of Soviet daring and American humiliation. But Laika never came back. Her heartbeat faded hours after launch, her capsule turning slowly in silence. It was a grim reminder that space did not forgive mistakes. The U-2s kept flying. The Soviets kept searching. Both knew the next step would be higher, faster, and infinitely more dangerous. Space had become the new front line, invisible, untouchable, yet terrifyingly real. In 1957, as Christmas lights flickered across America, few noticed the quiet ceremony in Huntsville, Alabama. Von Braun stood before a small crowd at the Redstone Arsenal, holding a model rocket barely 2 feet tall. "This," he said softly, "is not a weapon. It is a messenger." He paused, looking up at the sky. "But messages can change the world." He was right. Within a year, Project Vanguard would fail spectacularly on live television, exploding seconds after launch. America's embarrassment was complete, but from that failure came determination. Von Braun's team was finally given permission to proceed. And so, in January 1958, Explorer 1 rose into the night, slender, white, and trembling with power. It carried no bomb, no camera, just a Geiger counter to measure cosmic rays. But it worked. For the first time, the American flag orbited Earth. The nation exhaled. Explorer's success ended part 1 of the race, but the real contest had only just begun. Because in secret, deep inside a black budget line item labeled Weather Research, engineers were building something extraordinary, a mechanical eye that would soon watch the entire planet from space. A new kind of warfare was about to begin, fought not with bullets but with information. And as the last echoes of Sputnik's beeps faded into the static of space, both sides understood the truth. Whoever could see everything could control everything. The night Explorer 1 reached orbit, the world changed, but few people truly understood how. For most, It was another headline, another victory in the Cold War scoreboard. For a handful of men in windowless rooms, it was the beginning of something terrifying and beautiful, the power to watch the Earth itself. In an office hidden behind false doors at the CIA's headquarters in Langley, a small team gathered around a table covered in photographs. None of them had been taken from space yet, but the dream was already written in ink. Corona, top priority. The task sounded impossible. Build a machine that could see across continents, take crystal-clear photos from 200 kilometers above the ground, and return those pictures to Earth safely. No computer screens, no live transmission, just 70 millimeters of fragile film that would have to survive fire, vacuum, and gravity before landing in the open sky. The Air Force called it Project Discoverer, a decoy name printed on press releases and congressional reports. To the world, it looked like a scientific satellite program studying the upper atmosphere. To the handful of engineers who knew the truth, it was the most ambitious spy operation in history. In the early months of 1958, the work began at Lockheed Skunk Works, hidden deep inside California's desert. Engineers spoke in code names, even among themselves. They used paper notes that were shredded at day's end and phones that clicked with encryption. The rocket that would carry Corona to orbit was being modified from Thor, a missile once designed to deliver nuclear warheads. Now, it would deliver film. But the devil was in the details. How do you focus a camera that no one can ever adjust? How do you guide a re-entry capsule with no radio control? How do you catch something falling at 10 times the speed of sound before it sinks into the Pacific? The answer came from an unlikely place: the Air Force's recovery squadrons trained to intercept parachutes midair. Pilots would fly modified C-119 flying boxcars beneath the capsule, snagging its parachute line with a steel hook. It sounded absurd, and during the first 8 missions it was. Capsules burned up on re-entry, missed the drop zone, or shattered on impact. In one case, a fisherman off Hawaii hauled up a strange metal ball tangled in his net, then watched as unmarked agents took it away without a word. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, the same race had begun in silence. The Zenit program, supervised by chief designer Yangel, mirrored Corona's goals almost perfectly: large film cameras, orbital passes over America, parachute recovery. But the Soviets, cautious after multiple rocket explosions, chose a slower path. Their rockets were heavier, their secrecy tighter, their fear greater. In Washington, fear turned to frustration. By 1959, every Corona mission had failed. One senator, reading a classified report, muttered, "We're throwing cameras into the sky and praying they come back." Yet inside Lockheed's cleanrooms, one engineer simply said, "Failure is data." The CIA didn't cancel the project. Instead, they doubled it. In the summer of 1960, a man named Richard Bissell, the mastermind behind the U-2 program, stood before President Eisenhower with a single-page report. At the top, 3 words were typed in bold: "We can see them." Bissell wasn't promising success. He was promising inevitability. Just weeks later, on August 18, 1960, the impossible happened. Discoverer 14, carrying the KH-1 camera system, reached orbit successfully. For 2 days, it circled the Earth 16 times, taking thousands of images on rotating rolls of film. Then, at the precise second planned, the satellite released its re-entry capsule. The world below had no idea that history was falling through its sky. High above the Pacific, an Air Force C-119 crew spotted a silver glint against the clouds. They swung into position, engines roaring, hook extended. The pilot called out, "Visual acquired, stand by," and then tension. Contact. The hook caught the parachute line. The capsule swung beneath the aircraft, intact. Cheers erupted on the radio. 2 hours later, at a secure processing center, technicians unspooled the film in silence. The first frame came into focus: a Soviet airfield in Kazakhstan, captured from orbit with astonishing clarity. They could count aircraft, Identify hangars, estimate runways. One analyst whispered, "It's like God's view." Corona had worked. The United States had its eye in the sky. Overnight, the intelligence map of the world changed. Eisenhower's first reaction was caution. He ordered that no photographs from space be made public. The official story remained atmospheric research. Even Congress didn't know what had been achieved. But behind closed doors, generals stared at the prints in disbelief. The age of reconnaissance had entered orbit. Yet even as America celebrated in secret, another disaster struck, this time not in space but in the sky. On May 1, 1960, a U-2 spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Sverdlovsk. The Soviets displayed the wreckage, the pilot, and the film to the world. America's plausible deniability evaporated overnight. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev thundered in fury. "You've been spying on us like criminals," he shouted before the world press. The Paris summit collapsed. Eisenhower took public responsibility, ending all U-2 flights over Soviet territory. For the CIA, it was a nightmare and an opportunity. With the skies closed, only space remained. That same month, new Corona capsules were already in production. Engineers improved the optics, stabilized the film reels, and reinforced the heat shields. The satellites were still fragile, temperamental, prone to explosions, but they were the only option left. Every successful recovery meant another classified celebration. The Air Force even coined a phrase for it: "Catch a bucket, save a war." Inside the CIA's Photographic Intelligence Division, a warehouse-sized building with no windows, teams worked around the clock. Analysts hunched over light tables, magnifying images of railways, missile silos, and submarine pens. Each strip of film represented a slice of the unknown world. Every blur, every shadow mattered. They called it the Silent War, fought with lenses instead of bullets. By late 1961, Corona had captured over 750,000 images. The U.S. now knew the Soviet nuclear arsenal was far smaller than feared. The missile gap that haunted American politics was a myth. Eisenhower's quiet smile during briefings told the story. Information was victory. But there was danger in knowing too much. The existence of Corona was still so classified that only a few dozen people in government knew its name. Even the vice president wasn't briefed. Data had become the most sensitive weapon on Earth. Meanwhile, the Soviets weren't idle. Their Zenit 2 satellites began returning usable photographs in 1962, showing American naval movements and European bases. Their engineers copied Corona's recovery system, even adopting similar mid-air retrieval tactics. Space had become a mirror, each side watching the other, both pretending they were. While politicians spoke of peace, orbit had become crowded with secrets. In that same year, a new crisis erupted: Cuba. The U.S. learned through aerial photos that the Soviets were installing nuclear missiles just 90 miles from Florida. For 13 days, the world hovered on the edge of annihilation. But what few people know is that during those tense nights, the CIA was already testing advanced spy satellite prototypes, images from space confirming what low-level flights could not. Corona's reconnaissance allowed analysts to map every launch site, track construction, and verify missile withdrawal once the crisis ended. It wasn't diplomacy that prevented nuclear war, it was photography. And yet, for all its triumphs, Corona remained a fragile machine. In 1962, Discoverer 38 exploded mid-launch, scattering classified debris across the Pacific. Recovery teams raced against Soviet trawlers to retrieve the wreckage. It was a reminder that even in success, space was still an unforgiving frontier. Back in Washington, a new generation of engineers began dreaming beyond film. They wanted instant transmission, digital eyes that didn't need to drop from orbit. The technology wasn't ready yet, but the seed had been planted. In a dimly lit briefing room that winter, President John F. Kennedy was shown a classified film reel sped-up footage of the Earth rolling beneath Corona's lens. He watched silently as continents drifted past, white clouds swirling over blue oceans. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Then he paused. "And terrifying." For the first time, a world leader understood what it meant to be watched from space. When Kennedy later announced the Apollo program, he called it a race, not only for discovery but for peace. What he didn't say was that behind every promise of peace, a hidden war was already being fought above our heads. By the end of 1962, the United States had launched more than 40 Corona satellites. Success was no longer measured in explosions or victories, but in clarity. The better the picture, the safer the world. And in that strange calculus of the Cold War, the Earth itself had become both battlefield and witness. The ultimate weapon was no longer a bomb, but a photograph. As the decade turned, the engineers who built Corona began dismantling its earliest versions. The program was maturing. The technology was evolving. The next generation of satellites would see more, see faster, see everything. But none of them could escape the question that haunted them all. If we can see everything, what happens when we start watching ourselves? They used to say the ocean was humanity's last frontier. They were wrong. By the mid-1960s, the real frontier wasn't below, it was above, invisible, silent, and watching. Space was no longer a mystery. It was a territory, carved, surveilled, and conquered by cameras the size of cars orbiting hundreds of miles overhead. What began as a desperate gamble called Corona had now become the backbone of modern intelligence. And with every picture that came back, the world below changed forever. At the start of 1963, the CIA and the Air Force quietly merged their satellite programs into a new branch called the National Reconnaissance Office, so secret that even its existence would remain classified for decades. Its mission was simple: control the sky. The new generation of satellites was unlike anything seen before. They carried multiple film canisters, each one capable of taking tens of thousands of high-resolution photos. The lenses were now so powerful they could read a newspaper headline from orbit. Engineers joked that if you stood in Red Square long enough, America would know what color your hat was. It wasn't a joke. Corona's successor was called Gambit, codenamed KH-7. It could photograph individual launch pads, test sites, and missile silos. Its camera was built by Eastman Kodak, the same company that once sold family cameras, now building tools of global espionage. Inside Langley's darkrooms, analysts stared through magnifiers at strips of film where each dot and shadow could alter foreign policy. Meanwhile, the Soviets were catching up. Their Zenit 4 and Yantar satellites matched America's resolution. Each launch was a chess move, another unspoken escalation in a war that could never be declared. And yet the irony was that the more they saw, the less they wanted to fight. By 1964, both sides realized something profound. Seeing the enemy clearly removed the fear of the unknown. No more guessing, no more rumors. Surveillance was becoming deterrence. In one classified meeting, a U.S. general said, "Gentlemen, satellites are the first weapons of peace." He wasn't wrong. That same year, the first KH-8 Gambit 3 satellite was launched, capable of resolving objects barely 2 feet wide from 100 miles up. Its film return capsules were caught midair by C-130 aircraft, often at night, to avoid Soviet radar. The footage it brought back was astonishing: sprawling missile complexes, submarine bases hidden beneath forests, aircraft under construction that intelligence analysts didn't even know existed. Every new image widened the gap between reality and rhetoric. Politicians shouted about Soviet dominance. The satellites said otherwise. And so, quietly, space spying prevented war, not through treaties but through proof. But the Cold War had many fronts. In 1965, the United States escalated its involvement in Vietnam, and with it came the need for more eyes, faster ones. The jungles were too dense, the weather unpredictable, the maps outdated. Satellites that once watched Moscow now turned their lenses toward Southeast Asia. Each pass revealed troop movements, supply routes, even freshly dug trenches. A new generation of engineers pushed the limits again. They dreamed of satellites that didn't rely on film at all, ones that could transmit images directly to Earth. The idea sounded impossible, but digital sensors were beginning to emerge from laboratory benches. Their prototype was codenamed KH-11 Kennen, the world's first electro-optical reconnaissance satellite. But before Kennen came online, there was one final giant to be built, a machine that would redefine what surveillance meant. It was called the KH-9 Hexagon. Nicknamed Big Bird, the Hexagon was the size of a school bus, a masterpiece of 1960s engineering. It carried 60 miles of film on board. Its cameras could capture panoramic images stretching across entire countries in a single frame. When the first Hexagon launched in 1971, even the engineers doubted it would survive re-entry. But it did, and what it brought back stunned everyone. Entire landscapes came alive: missile trails, shipyards, rail lines, radar arrays, and oil fields, all visible from space in exquisite detail. One photograph of the Soviet Pacific Fleet alone filled an entire wall at the Pentagon. President Nixon was shown the images in a private briefing. He stared for several minutes without speaking. Then he turned to his aides and said, "Gentlemen, this changes everything." And he was right, because for the first time in history, no nation could move unseen. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union launched its own Leviathans, Yantar 2K satellites, capable of returning multiple film capsules. Their engineers faced the same risks: re-entry failures, parachute tears, lost canisters. Soviet fishing boats sometimes patrolled under orbital paths, hopping to recover stray American capsules. American destroyers did the same. The Cold War wasn't just fought in Berlin or Cuba anymore. It was fought in the skies above the entire planet. But as both sides filled orbit with eyes, another truth emerged: space was becoming crowded. Thousands of fragments from failed rockets and exploded satellites began circling the Earth, a growing cloud of metal ghosts that would haunt future generations. The heavens had become polluted by secrecy. By 1967, there were so many satellites in orbit that world leaders met to write a treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, forbidding the placement of nuclear weapons in space. Officially, it was a promise of peace. Unofficially, both sides already knew that the deadliest weapon up there didn't need explosives, only a lens. 1 year later, a new form of war began quietly. Not the kind fought with soldiers, but with information. Satellites started intercepting radio transmissions, tracking radar pulses, and mapping microwave networks. Intelligence was no longer about photographs alone. It was about everything invisible. The CIA called it signals intelligence. The Soviets called it radioelectronic combat. The world had entered an age where silence could be weaponized. And yet, amid all this paranoia, something unexpected happened. The same technology designed to spy also began to serve. The Nimbus and Tyros weather satellites, descendants of Corona systems, started forecasting hurricanes. Landsat began photographing Earth's surface for agriculture and science. The same eyes that once searched for missiles now mapped forests and oceans. The line between espionage and exploration blurred completely. Still, in the heart of every intelligence officer, one truth remained: trust was dead. Every leader knew they were being watched, and in some twisted way, it kept them honest. In 1970, a classified report titled Eyes of Peace circulated through Washington. It argued that surveillance was no longer just an act of defense, it was diplomacy. The more you see, the less you fear. The less you fear, the less you fight. When the strategic arms limitation talks began, both nations used satellite photos as evidence proof that treaties were being honored. For the first time, Orbiting cameras became instruments of peace. They were still spies, but now they were referees. And yet there was always a cost. With every new camera, privacy shrank. Every advance brought comfort and unease in equal measure. The sky above was no longer blue, it was glass. By 1972, the Hexagon program was in full operation. Hundreds of thousands of photos poured into vaults at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, entire buildings filled with drawers of classified negatives. Analysts whispered that if someone could ever see them all at once, they'd see the entire history of the Cold War unfold frame by frame. But the greatest irony was this: the people who built the most powerful eyes in history would never be seen themselves. Their work stayed buried, classified, invisible. The satellites got names, the humans who made them didn't. One of those engineers, decades later, said quietly in an interview, "We didn't just build cameras. We built the mirror humanity would eventually see itself in." And he was right. Because those early spy satellites born from fear, secrecy, and rivalry would go on to birth an entirely new world. The technology behind their cameras evolved into digital imaging, into GPS, into Google Earth, into the very eyes of our modern civilization. Every map on your phone, every weather forecast, every global broadcast, all descended from those first Cold War machines launched to keep us afraid. In the end, the satellites that began as weapons of distrust became tools of connection. Humanity, for the first time, could look down upon its entire planet and realize it was one. But there's a darker symmetry, too. The same systems that promise safety also created the age of surveillance we now live in. Every street camera, every orbiting sensor, every algorithm that watches without blinking, all trace their lineage back to Corona's first photo. In the twilight of the 1960s, as Apollo astronauts left footprints on the moon, another message quietly echoed across the control rooms of Earth. We are no longer blind. It was a victory built on secrecy, a peace built on constant vigilance, and a reminder that in the endless balance between knowledge and fear, we will always look upward not for answers, but for assurance that someone, somewhere, is still watching. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this from Storygram.